Go ahead whenever you wish.
Okay, I can activate the share screen and
Should
do
be able to, yes.
Okay, here it comes. We'll see. Part 2. Here we are. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our talk on hearing aids for beginners. And let me activate my presenter view. Get some of the stuff out of the way. And so I have my presenter view, and I've got screen sharing, and I've got so much stuff I got to move around here. I'm going to minimize this view of the thing. And okay, so got a lot of stuff going on this morning on my screen. I'm sorry about that, and I lost my PowerPoint. I have a very fragile the presentation here. So let me see. There you go. Okay. I don't know what you guys are seeing. I'm seeing a lot of things on my screen. But
It looks okay, Joe.
Okay, that's great. So I'm going to go back. I can get back. It's behaving badly, actually, is what's happening here. Okay, here you go. Got part 2. And this is hearing aids for beginners. We're covering basic information. And in review, what we discussed about last time, the most significant item probably was that hearing aids are much more complicated than most people think. There's probably more demands placed on hearing aids than possibly any other body-borne or portable listening device. And what they're doing is they're actually processing sounds in a wide variety of unrestricted acoustic environments in real time without the benefit of an audio engineer or any third party with a very limited power supply. And I think we need to keep that in mind, that we're working with 1.5 volts and actually probably less than that, and in a very, very tiny package. And we started to say that hearing aid acquisition is not a simple matter. And it's going to be difficult to proceed without, I think, the assistance of a knowledgeable third party. And without that kind of assistance, outcomes can be in doubt. And surprisingly, most problems that users are simple and inexpensive issues, which are easily resolved with minimal, if any, expense with the help of a hearing professional. So our goals for today, we've already had the brief review of part 1. We're going to talk about differences between the providers. I think this will be of interest. And as usual, I have a disclaimer. Then we'll talk about expectations for benefit and or problems you shouldn't be having with hearing. And we're going to end with an overview of the audiogram. We'll start. There are 2 classes of providers that make hearing aids available for individuals. There's the commercial providers, BCHIS. That stands for Board Certified Hearing Instrument Specialist. And there's the professional providers, which by that I mean audiologists with an AUD, that's a doctoral level clinical degree or a master's degree. Those of us with a master's degree are being grandfathered in to eligibility to provide service. But when we all go away, it will all be an AUD, will be the minimum requirement. So let's talk first about audiologists. We view ourselves as being a health-related helping profession, AUD, that's Doctor of Audiology. As I've said, it's a professional level degree and we all graduate with the appellation, or we call ourselves clinical audiologists. Now, it's rare to find someone who's not really mission oriented in order to become an audiologist. And I'm going to focus here. By this, I mean it's a health related helping profession. It takes 7 to 8 years now of combined college and graduate school training, an extensive residency, substantial clinical requirements, and a wide variety of fields, not just hearing aids, but industrial audiology and educational audiology in the schools and medical audiology to assist in the medical diagnostics of hearing loss and site of lesion where the hearing loss might be. The brainstem, the outer ear, the auditory nerve, and all sorts of locations along the auditory pathways. And of course, anybody who's been to college and graduate school know that you don't graduate without having passed innumerable courses, all having to do with hearing and speech and language and speech science, et cetera, et cetera. Innumerable exams, a half sheet questionnaires, and you've performed and presented a number of presentations and so on. It's a rigorous course of study. And it's not cheap. It costs $100,000 to $200,000 minimum to become an AUD. So you don't get people going into this who are looking to sell something. Instead, they are kind of mission driven. And we are regulated by the Department of Education in New York State, not the Department of State, which regulates. Now, if someone gets involved in the hearing aid work, well, then they too must register and go through all of the requirements. But really, all they have to do is to show they know how to take an ear impression. We have a comprehensive national examination, and there's also requirements for our national professional societies, all of which a number of which we all belong to, and have to meet stringent requirements. Now, in terms of hearing instrument specialists, it's a whole different ballgame, and I'm not trying to denigrate anybody, just to explain the difference here. We said BCHIS is board certified hearing instrument specialist. This is basically, we have to face it, this is a sales profession. And I think very few BCHIS individuals really start out in their life wanting to be a provider of hearing aids. Instead, my sense is that typically people go back into it after trying some other things. The requirements are vastly different. In New York State, it takes only 2 years of college credit in any field, and you don't even need a degree. So that's not necessary, but you do need 2 years of college credit in any area or multiple areas. Now, the professional training is very different. It might be a 3 or a 5-day seminar, or it might be on-the-job training program on hearing loss and hearing aids, plus 6 months of direct supervision. Sometimes this can be done through a correspondence course or by subscribing to DVD programs, this kind of thing. It takes a year in New York State. You need 6 months direct supervision. That means with the possibility of somebody looking over your shoulder as you're doing your work. And then 6 months of indirect supervision, meaning you can be on your own, but you have to report to a certified individual. I pulled this from, oh, excuse me, I'm ahead of myself here. The BCHIS credential is based on just one examination. That's all, just one. On hearing hearing loss and hearing aids. And this training, by the way, is recognized by a very large, I'm going to say about like yay large, an attractive certificate. So you walk in the office and that's the first thing you see. And it is very impressive. It's considerably larger than the typical professional degree diploma. And now I'm sure there are other certification programs than the ones I'm going to be describing to you just now. This material that I'm presenting here was taken from an ad in one of our hearing aid trade magazines, which targeted new commercial hearing aid dispensers. The headline was "Pass Your Examinations." There were three options. One, you could do a 3-day live seminar for the cost of $1,295 as in 2016. Or as we said, you can take a 5-day classroom and lab activity seminar. And these things travel, or they'll travel, or you can travel to their home location for this training. Or you can subscribe to, there's 4 DVDs, each one's about $500. You can obtain your training that way. The live 3-day seminar includes practical training, some required course knowledge, and preparation for state licensing. That's what was advertised. Probably there's more training and it's a little deeper than that. So now let's talk about comparative shopping. As people go around and they talk to the professional sector and the commercial sector, without a doubt, the commercial sector is much better at hyping the product and the feature of the product and what the product will do for the individual. And they focus on buzzwords and product claims and channels and bands and terminology. And it's their goal to get the consumer excited about the goodies in the hearing aids and all the nice features. Typically, the professional sector doesn't engage in that. Instead, we're trained as health-related individuals, taking your case history, finding out what your needs are, and then trying to select the best product for you based on what you've told us. My experience has been my own personal experience, and I've seen it in our Hope sessions as well, that when individuals have gone to a professional or the commercial sector almost always wins. Well, they're better at convincing. We had a prime example of that a while ago. Somebody had seen a PhD audiologist in town, and then they went over to one of the franchises. And they came to the Hope session confused about where should I go? What should I do? And so I tried to talk with him at length about the differences between the providers. And I've seen it in my own practice. And smart people too. And they wind up going for the commercial sector because they're talking with all the buzzwords and they present like they really know what they're talking about and what their products will do. Now we'll see later on in one of the slides I have here that there's actually a disconnect there. Providers look like they really know what they're doing, but yet overall rates of satisfaction aren't all that great. So there's some disconnect there. And I will say that audiologists generally don't touting about the product features and all the good items that the hearing aids have. As we said, hearing aids are much more complicated than initially meet the eye. And because of this, it's really important, if you can, to involve other family members in the process or major communication partners. Take somebody with you to the sessions, okay? They need to be part of the process too. they need to learn about hearing aids, what they can do and what they can't do. And they also need to be there to help you make the decisions about which is the best product for you. And, you're going to get bombarded with a lot of information, and not just in the initial session, but as you go along. And it's hard to keep everything in your mind. So it's always good to have another set of eyes and ears on the situation to help out. And they too need to get an idea of all the complexities involved in hearing aid use. It's not just like putting an earpiece in your ear and going around and life being great. It's a lot more complex than that. I think we talked too the last time about the hardest part is to find a provider. How do you do that? A good place to start is to ask your primary care physician. Another one, ask around. You see somebody with hearing aids, ask them how they're doing, where they got it from, how often did they go back, how much did they pay for it, what kind of follow-up have they received, etc. Or if you can't get any assistance that way, of course, you can always go online, skip the first few ads because that's all advertising, and then look for audiologists and make sure that the degree shows, and they state the degree, MS or AUD. And best yet, at least in this area, and I'm sorry about you, Pam, out there in Colorado, I don't know the story out there. I don't know the drill. There's at least 9 practices of audiology, private practices, and 1 or 2 agencies that advertise in our newsletter. And that and they all appear in the back of the newsletter, and they're all very good providers. I don't know about the Rochester area or the Buffalo area, but you can rest assured that in the Rochester area, all of our private practitioner providers are top notch. And of course, it's good to have some level of support. And our chapter here of HLAA is a very good source of support. We have our Hope sessions, which I'm going to have one tomorrow. It's on the second Tuesday of each month. And it's an opportunity for people to come in and join, ask questions of each other, and ask experienced users what they've found to be useful. And this is the time when anything's on the table. Ask whatever you want. Of course, you can do that here too, I think. And it's all users. I'm there to assist with some of the technical audiology questions and sometimes to re-steer things a little bit, just simply because it might be advantageous to do that. We are going to be having future sessions. This is going to repeat. So if you know somebody who has this kind of interest or any thoughts or concerns, you can refer them to here. Now, if you're in the Rochester area and you know someone who has a severe hearing loss, there's a lot of organizations for deaf around here. You can look that up under deafness online. And I would point to the Rochester Recreation Club for the Deaf as a good place to start out. Or of course, go online or Facebook or YouTube or one of those other sites. As you go about getting hearing aids, please try not to respond to those ads, the flashy ads, or the claims or the flyers that you get in the mail. Especially the ones that promote the national experts. We talked about that last time. Good ads mean good ad agencies, but it may not have a connection to the actual provider you're going to be seeing. Never follow up on an outfit that's offering 50% off or 30 or 40% off. That's not a discount. Guarantee you, that's the normal price. And we may have mentioned last time that the new insurance plans, the third-party agreements or the providers, they don't really help. They offer a discounted plan with probably less than the best instruments, or possibly, we don't know that for sure. And don't hold me to that, but that's the experience that I've heard from the providers in this area and certainly in the literature. And sometimes there's very few follow-up visits involved, and you need the ability to follow up. That's critical. You never know if you're going to be someone who's going to need a lot more visits or not. And if you're limited to 2 follow-up visits every time you walk in the door, there's going to be an additional charge. Well, the provider has to charge you because there's not enough margin to cover the expenses. We may have said before, hearing aid work is slow. It's very slow. And it's not like you can put hearing aids on and walk out the door and be done with it. Avoid advertisements claiming hearing aid breakthroughs or those other kinds of claims. There are no hearing aid breakthroughs. They're all incremental. And what happens is a company will come out with a new idea, and within a heartbeat, it's trickled down to all the other companies too. It seems like they have it for a little bit, and then they might just license it out to the other manufacturers, or it might get copied with just a little bit of a variation. And we said last time, and this hasn't changed, it's always going to be the case, the provider is the most important part. If you're going to respond to ads, look for the soft or the highline ads, where they tout their expertise, or they just tout better hearing, or they've got testimonials from patients. These are the places more likely you want to go. But as I say, ask around, look in our newsletter. So you need to realize that a satisfaction with hearing aids can be elusive. And a recent article published indicated that only 50 to 70% of users are satisfied with their hearing aids. Now, that's not great, is it? Especially if you're on the lower end. Paid all this money, and yet you're not entirely satisfied with what you've got. Of course, because of that, a large number of them wind up in the drawer. And why is this? Because you can get along, can't you? And this is with assistance from a professional advisor. Imagine, or provider, what's it going to be like if you buy something over the counter or online? And in relation to that, there's not a good record of utilization or satisfaction of hearing aids that are bought online or over the counter to date. Maybe that'll change. I don't know. Typically, the issues are that most people wind up having problems with simple user-related issues, which, of course, the users don't realize they're simple, and they don't know they're easily remedied. Usually they can do okay on the acoustic part, at least according to one study. And of course, sometimes people still even now expect studio grade performance, and people expect to have problems. So, if it comes down to over the counter or buying cheap hearing aids or going to a major discount house, it all boils down to how much are you willing to risk? And one of my neighbors pointed that out yesterday. How much are you willing to risk? And he said he's got a pair of hearing aids he bought from somewhere, not happy with them, hardly ever uses them. He's lost them. So he went out and he bought something online or in a store for a couple of $100. And he said, it all boils down to, Joe, is how much are you willing to risk? And we talked about before, there can be, I'm not saying there's going to be, unpredictable interactive effects between the user, sometimes between the user, the hearing aid, and their hearing loss. Simply can't count on putting your hearing aid on and walking out the door. And one of the things that you really want to get, and we'll talk about the importance of this later on, shortly, actually, is when you have your hearing tested, make sure you have a word recognition test performed, especially if you're an experienced user and you're not satisfied with your hearing aids. You need to make sure that that's not due to a deficiency in your own personal word recognition ability, as defined by your ears, okay? One expert reported proper hearing aid fitting takes 2.5 hours. We found in our practice that we set our fitting protocol for 2 3/4 hours. And then that's when everything went well. And then we had more follow-up visits as necessary, and a 6-month check and an annual reevaluation and hearing aid check in 1 year. And we brought people back whether hearing aids are in warranty. Now, hearing aids all have probably a 1-year manufacturer's warranty, loss or damage. The more expensive hearing aids might have a 3-year warranty. Our practice, all services were free during the first year, but after the first year, we charged for our office time and reevaluations and hearing aid checks. There was a separate fee for. But if there was a problem with the hearing aid, it went back to the manufacturer, and that was covered at no cost. End result was we had very high rates of satisfaction. Our success rate, which is what I asked you at first, was really high, 97%. 97%, unbelievable. I was surprised by it. So we did it 3 times, and it was 95, 96, 97% in that range. Satisfaction, on the other hand, is harder. And still, our long-term rate was 94%. This is compared to what we said before, the national average of 50 to 70%. Now, that difference wasn't due to my better grasp of technology or our better grasp of technology, but it was due to our follow-up protocol. It was that simple. Because the results were so good, twice we had them verified by attorneys. They selected the patients from our list of users, and they sent out the results or the questionnaire. It went back to them, and they tallied the results. So if you do follow up in a proper way, and most providers don't do it the way that we did. So it's going to be up to you, consumer, to make sure that the follow-up is happening as you need it. You need to take an active part in the follow-up with your hearing aids. Now, this is what I mentioned earlier. As you recall, average rate of satisfaction over the years has been 50 to 70% with hearing aids. Yet, approximately 94% of the users are satisfied with their hearing aid providers. That's huge, isn't it? So that's quite a difference. So they're thinking that their providers are good, and any problems are due to the hearing aids. And there were 6 criteria that they measured, and probably still do. And the highest rating was professionalism. People acted as professional. And this includes the commercial sector as well. You know, they walk around in their white coats, they use a certain kind of language, their posturing is such. So that's the professionalism. And the lowest level was still pretty darn good at 90%. And that was of explanation of the implications, you know, what you're going to be getting from your hearing aid, this kind of thing. So there's a disconnect between providers looking good and then the actual outcome with the hearing aids. So as we said, it's hard to find a good provider. And I'm just, once again, talking about HLAA Rochester as a source. And we've talked about my assumptions for hearing aids. And that was that they're very expensive. I tried to bring down the cost. I had that opportunity twice, found out you can't do it. Very hard to do it. And people expect problems. Thing is, users don't know what's normal and what isn't, and what they shouldn't put up with. I think we've talked about this before too. So now I'm going to give you some ideas of what we found in our practice. And I just need to repeat that what we're about to say pertains only to my practice, our practice, and the way we chose to implement it. And as you recall, there's so many different opinions and approaches and thoughts of how things should turn out. for us, I may have said, I don't know how to evaluate all the claims about so many channels being good, or this new feature, this voice finder option working well, or this directional feature working well. I can't evaluate that in the office. I have no way to do it. All I could do was to keep track of how people did with their hearing aids. And what I learned to do was to identify all the problems that people were having and then list them, organize them in a way in which I could manage them somehow or attack them and just keep chipping away at it. I also asked all the things where they found helpful, and I was able to rank what was the most helpful, what was the least helpful, and these kinds of things. So that this all leads to the discussion that will be coming up. We practiced the active follow-up model, and we talked about that. It was our assumption that it was our responsibility to make sure that the user was doing as well as they could. And as I said, it's not because of our technical expertise. It's just because we just hung on to the patient till we were satisfied that their problems were resolved as best as we could. And this is not a new slide. You've seen this before. So I base what I'm about to say on our results for about 900 short-term users based on this 140 data points that we collected, more or less. This was in the first 6 to 8 weeks. And you keep in mind that new users were still in their honeymoon period, which I was told once lasts for the first 4 months. And then we also looked at long-term results, which meant that somebody had had their hearing aids for at least 12 months, but no longer than 36 months. So the second and third year. And what we were trying to do was to get an idea of their long-term experiences. So I was able to identify some things that were under our total control as a provider. Number one was feedback. That's whistling and squealing. Now, I don't know if you can hear it, but my hearing aids still whistle a little bit. But that's normal, okay? It's not a major problem. It's not even inconveniencing any longer. It's there. The new technology has really made a big difference with it. If someone's having a problem with feedback, they should not have a problem with feedback. It just shouldn't be. You should not be needing to turn the volume up and down excessively. If you're having a problem with that, that's not right. This is something the provider can assure you don't have a problem with. And floor noise. You may not know what that term means, but you've probably heard it before. So that when you turn up your stereo and there's nothing playing, you hear a hissing or a rushing noise. That's the floor noise. I think all electronic instrumentation has floor noise. And it is sometimes expressed as a signal to noise ratio. And the newer hearing aids have virtually no floor noise. But you know what? You don't know that as a provider unless you listen to them. And we listen to every hearing aid that we dispensed except for the power aids. Compression. You still hear compression sound sometimes on television, which is basically an automatic gain feature. And it'll be expressed as a noticeable variation in the gain of the signal, or it'll be a whooshing or a swooshing sound as the compression circuits go into play. The better quality hearing aids no longer have compression issues. They pretty much got that technology down, but I don't know what the situation is for the over-the-counter hearing aids and some of the newer, less expensive things that will be coming along. And then, I have just so much trouble with this slide here. You should not have distortion. Things should not sound fuzzy or splattery or with poor sound quality. And they should be clear. So you shouldn't have any problems with distortion. You should be able to hear as good with your hearing aid in a quiet situation as you can over any other device. Of course, they should be reliable. You shouldn't have no discomfort. That's critical. If you're having a molded product, it should never be uncomfortable in your ear, ever. If it is, take it back to your provider. Keep going back until you've got a good, comfortable fit. There's no excuse for that. And then finally, annoyance from sudden, sharp, or loud transient sounds. That should never be a problem. Now, there's a wide variation on hearing aids out there and how they treat these loud, sharp transients. And the only way I ever found to make sure that the hearing aids we provided were not a problem in that respect was to listen to them or to wear them, just to make sure that my users were not getting that banged away thing in their ears. That was the major separator for the different hearing aids that we tried. Now, here's an aside. When I started my practice on my own, I had read an awful lot about hearing aids. I was very well acquainted with the literature, but I didn't know the nitty gritty. And I didn't know what really made a difference from one hearing aid to the other. So I set into a period of comparisons where I had people try 2 different hearing aids from different manufacturers. At first, I didn't even know what to ask, so I just had them come back and tell me what their experiences were like. After a while, a few things emerged. One of the things that always emerged was the annoyance from loud and sharp sounds. It was so dramatic that I actually wrote that up as a couple of papers. I presented one at our state conference, and then the other one at a, believe it or not, international hearing aid conference. There were people from all over, France and England and Australia. And this was in Iowa. And it just makes such a difference. Now, don't get me wrong. The papers weren't accepted because I reported about sharp sounds, but they were accepted because they displayed the difference between the different products quite nicely. And this was the primary separator between the different hearing aids. Once again, background noise, it's there. It's always going to be there. You're never going to get rid of it. There's general noise that's around you, everyday noise, that's a little harder to control. But your hearing aids can be set in such a way that it's not as intrusive as it needs to be. Noise around the house, you have total control over that. There are some interference by other sounds. Sometimes that's really tough, but it shouldn't be a constant source of difficulty in everyday life. And then hardcore noise. Loud restaurants, weddings, sporting events, cocktail parties, those are tough things. Now, cocktail parties are getting better. There's some newer technology out there that's helping with that. But when you're in a loud situation like a wedding, you know what I do? I take my hearing aids off. As soon as I do that, of course, the noise level goes down, right? And the other people next to me and around me, they're bothered by it just as much as I am. So they raise their voice. So right away, if I'm close to them, I have an advantage that I'm able to hear them better. And sometimes that even doesn't work. So when it gets like that, I just order another gin and tonic or something and just look around and observe the wedding and be happy for the people that are getting married. If I want to talk to somebody, I'll say, hey, come on outside here. I can talk to you outside, because you're not going to defeat that. That's hard. Of course, you understand there's not going to be studio grade performance. A big issue is user-related issues: wax, batteries, hygiene, especially batteries. People put the batteries in backwards, or they'll sometimes even leave the tab on them, or they'll experience a problem with wax in the hearing aid and they'll start switching batteries out. They'll go through 6 or 8 batteries. Darn batteries. You know what? If you got 2 hearing aids, take the battery from the hearing aid that's working and put it in the hearing aid that's in question. If it still doesn't work, it's not the battery issue, it's something else. And it's always going to be hard to hear over a distance. Now, there's something which should always be true and which should work for you. I call this the gold standard. And this applies almost regardless of the hearing aid quality or how much money you spend. You should always be able to hear well in quiet, one-on-one, in a small group or with a small group in ideal listening circumstances. That should always be the case. It should always be clearer with the hearing aids than without a doubt. That's the gold standard. I don't care what you get. That should always be the case. Whether you buy $100 unit, and a lot of people will report they hear good at home, okay, but once they leave the home, then it's a different story, of course, but should always be able to hear better. You should be able to hear your spouse or communication partners better. The TV should be better. Before you get your hearing aids, note the volume control level of your television, okay? Be honest with yourself. You know, is it at 22? Okay. And you're not just when you can hear it, but when you can hear it comfortably and you can relax, you don't have to struggle to hear it. Then when you get your hearing aids, try them. I should have you should write that down because you're not going to remember it always. Write it down. And then when you get your hearing aids, then do your comparison. And once again, be honest with yourself at your easy, comfortable listening level where you don't have to work at it. Should hear natural sounds better, birds, crickets, leaves, mechanical sounds like your keyboard or refrigerator, and you know what I mean by that, fans, this kind of thing. Should always be able to hear well in professional offices, right? You're in a one-on-one, you're close to the provider, the person you're speaking with. There shouldn't be any background noise going on. If you play table games, that should always be good, right? You're close, you know what's going on. There's a lot of redundancy in the communication messages. Generally, people hear men's voices better. Depends on the shape of your hearing loss. If you've got, as I do, good hearing in the lows and down in the highs, if I'm with a bunch of guys, I can probably hear without my hearing aids. But then once the situation changes and we're not up close, then I'm dead in the water. You should be able to hear in small group meetings if you have good acoustic environments. And some of these others are all over the place, at the store, in the car. Hearing from the back seat in the car is always going to be tough. I recommend you sit kitty corner to the softest person in the car. Because what they normally do is they turn and they talk to the back seat. So if you're opposite them, you'll do better. In general, background noise, it depends on the level of the noise, the quality of the hearing aid you have, what your hearing loss is like, and how it's set. At restaurants, that can be tough depending on the restaurant. There's a lot of answers for that, but that's not part of this discussion. At worship, depends on where you sit and the acoustics of the facility. At performances, you almost always hear better at performances. You may not get it all without some assistance from an assistive device or something, but you always hear better in performances. We said meetings. Office work can be tough if there's phone work involved. That's the number one stopper. And how many people do we know that stopped working because they had trouble communicating on the phone? That can be really hard, even with all this assistive devices. And a lot of times offices have proprietary phones, and you can't really plug in assistive devices easily. That can be really tough. Hearing from room to room, guess what? Can't do it. It's never going to work. So that's a learned behavior that needs to be corrected and modified. Or when somebody walks away and they're talking to you, that's not going to work. Your hearing aids are not going to solve that. You're always going to have a problem with soft voices. It's unavoidable. The only solution is to get closer or to use some help of some sort. And there's lots of things you can learn about at the Assistive Device Demonstration Center. Young children, oh my gosh, there's nothing that you can do. I've read all the material. I've even tried a lot of things myself. The only thing that really works is to have an interpreter right next to you. Somebody who can explain to you what that child just said. In high noise environments, it's going to be tough. High in the wind, that's going to be tough too. There's some tricks you can do, turn your head a little bit so you don't have that same grazing incidence, but it's still going to be tough. Background noise, it's always going to be there. Can't get rid of it. It can be better, but you can't get rid of it. Usually short-term users we found, they didn't rate the noise as much of a problem. And whereas the long-term users really had a lot of frustration with the noise. Yet both groups reported, especially the long-term users. They'd complain like crazy, but they'd say, you know what, without my hearing aids, I wouldn't hear anything. So I think the difference is, and somebody pointed this out to me, is that the new users, they're just grateful to be hearing better. And they're so happy with that. Then the experienced users, then their reference change. It's not from what they used to hear, but now it's just what they would like to hear. And that's a big difference. And once again, as we said, both groups report they always heard better with your hearing aids than without. In the last 3 surveys we did of our long-term users, every single person reported they heard better in noise with their hearing aids than without. Now, we're going to close with a description of the audiogram. I'm running a little long here today, and I apologize for that. So you see areas here that are circled. And going from left to right, okay? First thing that I'm going to call up, I think I can magnify this, is the pure tone averages. You see this? This is on every audiogram that you receive that's done by an audiologist. The pure tone averages are always there. In this case, this person, pure tone average for the right ear is 49. For the left ear is 49. And we've talked about that before. It's the average of 500, 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000. These are the critical frequencies for understanding speech. And up here you can see percentage of contribution they make towards intelligibility. 14%, 22%, 33%, and 23%. So these are a big deal. And this is generally the indicator of the degree or severity of hearing loss. And 49 decibels indicates a clearly moderate level of hearing loss for this individual. And you can see it's right there in the middle of the chart almost, okay? Now down here, our audiograms are different. We recorded the first time somebody came in, the last time we saw them, and we compare that to where it is today. So you can see that hearing went down in the right ear, 5 dB, but in the left ear, only 2 dB in 3 years. Over here now, we have the aided results, the pure tone averages for aided results. So if you take the 4 frequency average, the sound field, that means just with speakers, no hearing aids. This person heard 57, their average was 57, and with a hearing aid, it was 30. That's a pretty nice improvement, you know. They got 27 decibels of improvement. That's darn good. So then we thought, let's take a look at just some of these critical frequencies here. And they were 2,000, 3,000, and 4,000. And here, the sound field average was 62 decibels. It was harder to hear these. And their aided score was 33 decibels, and their improvement moved up to 29 decibels. You know, usually all you get is 30, 35 dB. If you get 40, which you do once in a while, you're doing great. Sometimes you only get 5 or 10, no matter what you do. Now, over here's a legend. And one time somebody asked about what the X's and O's meant. Well, here's an explanation. Every audiogram has a legend. So if you're wondering what all these symbols mean, you can go over and you can look in the legend. As soon as I say that, I realize there's no C. C means center. So we would ask the individual where they heard the sound. And in all instances, it was in the center, except for one instances where they heard it right. B stands for both hearing aids, and the S is where the sound field or just speakers only. So you can visually see the difference between aided and unaided in this audiogram. Over here, we said, is speech recognition. So here's your speech audiometry scores. You can pretty much ignore speech reception threshold. We don't deal with that very much. This one here is a critical one. Word recognition. Remember I said you need pure tone average, word recognition, you need severity, which is expressed over here, and you need an idea of the configuration of the hearing loss. Now, this compares without the hearing aids, just under an earphone. This is with the hearing aid. Now, the critical indicator here is the intensity of the signal. Here, it's really quite loud. It's 80 decibels. As you recall, we said the average conversational level, well, the average range of, yes, the average conversational level is 50 decibels. So this is 30 dB lower, which is the amount of gain the person got. And look at what they got. They've still got 96%. If they didn't have hearing aids, they would be down to a much lower score for word recognition. Now here, I've outlined the most comfortable and the a listening level. So we asked them, where do you like to hear it best? Is this good? Is that good? Et cetera, et cetera. And then we asked, what's the loudest that you can stand it? So we found out for this case, it was 105 decibels. That's 5 dB lower than you would expect. So this person has a slight tolerance problem and a little bit narrower dynamic range, we used that term before, between the softest sound he can hear and the loudest sound he can hear. So this pretty much explains the audiogram for you. We also looked in ears, and both ears were clear, okay? So I'll just leave this on for a second before we move on to our next slide. So you can see pure tone averages are here. The speech recognition score is here. And you'll find that on every audiogram that's done by an audiologist. And it'd be filled in. You don't usually see the aided scores. That was kind of unique to our practice. And you don't always see these scores. In fact, the only time we ever do this is when the patient first comes in, the first time we see them, because then we know what they're going to need in terms of the technology level that is going to be best for them. After that, it's not critical. And with some of the newer hearing aids, they're so adjustable now that it's not as critical indicator as it used to be. So if you go somewhere and you don't see these values, don't be alarmed. It's not a big deal. What you do need is a pure tone average, so you know the degree of severity, and the word recognition ability, so you know the degree of possible improvement. I'll leave this up for just a few more seconds. And if you have any questions about the audiogram, you can ask me in a little bit. So let me see if I can get out of here. Move on to the next slide. So in review of this session, we discussed the differences between providers. There's a huge difference. We talked about the necessity of family involvement. I can't stress that enough. We talked about how difficult it is to find a provider. HLAA is a really good source. And other than that, boy, I don't know, word of mouth. Try to talk around to people. See who's happy with their hearing aids and who's not. Try to avoid responding to these splashy ads. Good ads do not mean good hearing aids or good providers. They mean good advertising agencies. And, satisfaction is hard. It's tough. And there's a difference between being satisfied with your hearing aid and being satisfied with your provider. The important thing is to be satisfied with your hearing aid, much less than your provider. And I don't know what I meant by provider options. Oh, yeah, we really didn't talk about that. We're talking about online, over the counter, or with a professional individual versus a commercial provider. Reasonable expectations, we went over that. We had quite a bit on it. We discussed things you should never have problems with. What our gold standard was other situations in which you should be able to hear better. We talked about background noise, it's always going to be there. And we explained the audiogram. So that's what we talked about today. And so at this point, I think we can stop and we can take questions. And now I got to find out how to get everybody back here. Oh, I lost you. So I can take questions while I'm trying to find everybody here. So,
Yeah, Joe, you have to stop sharing.
okay, thanks. All right. Does that do it?
Give it a moment.
Okay.
Still looks like I'm seeing your slide.
Oh, yeah, you are.
Is the upper top there should be a red button that says stop sharing.
Well, I can't even get out of this, Jazz. And I don't see stop sharing. Now here is, okay, there it goes. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Back.
I'm going to
All
stop.
right.
I'm
Okay,
gonna stop
guys.
the recording.
Okay. So are there any questions from anyone?